Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 191 of Humanity Rising. Yesterday, we looked at the pandemic from a scientific and medical point of view on the very day when the United States passed 500,000 deaths due to the COVID pandemic. More deaths than the amount of US citizens lost in World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined. We had Dr. Chris Beirer, who is a professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, talk to us about the science of the pandemic and the science of the vaccines. As someone who had lived through both the AIDS pandemic in the 1980s and 1990s and the COVID pandemic in which we find ourselves collectively experiencing today. And one of the amazing points that he made were around the similarities of the demographics of those parts of our populations that have been most strenuously hit. People of color, poor people, and the elderly, and even geographic similarities in the southern parts of the United States. It's quite an amazing thing to think about, the similarities between the AIDS and the COVID pandemics, both coming from nature. The AIDS pandemic coming from monkeys, the COVID pandemic coming from bats, as we've so systematically violated the natural boundaries in our ecosystem. Diseases that in normal times would be kept sequestered are now traveling in a cross-species way. It was a very serious conversation. We turn now to the question of how we can bolster our immune systems more robustly. And that's the topic that we're going to be discussing today. But before we do, let us take a pause. Let us take a few deep breaths. Let's close our eyes if you can and place your attention on your heart and see if in the next 60 to 90 seconds you can hear your own heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving that you're alive at this most extraordinary moment in human history. Thank you, everyone. And now with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who has joined our session today. I want to commence our program by first thanking my good friend Harriet Crosby, who I've known for many, many years now as a good friend and social activist whose idea it was to have this program. So Harriet, I just want to thank you for many years of friendship and for your ongoing inspiration for many of us with what you do. We want to probe now how we can bolster our immune systems. We're being told by our governments worldwide, and the World Health Organization, that we all have to get vaccinated. And to some degree, that's true. Vaccinations have proven themselves to be extraordinarily effective over the last 50, 75 years as medical technology has explored deeper into the science of illness and well-being. I remember when I was a little boy, I was out in the island of Taiwan. I was a missionary kid, and every year we'd get vaccinated against cholera and diphtheria and typhoid and tetanus and so forth. And it kept us healthy. And that is certainly being, I think, demonstrated in the vaccinations that are now coming out of our major pharmaceutical companies around the world. But that's not the whole story. And we'll be exploring in a session in a few weeks' time some of the darker aspects of vaccinations, some of the risks that are involved in vaccinations. And what we want to explore today is how we can improve our immune system naturally if we were robust and we had kept the natural order, our larger ecosystem, in a healthy way. The pandemic wouldn't have even happened. And that's, I think, a very important point for us to take in collectively as a human race, that into some significant degree, the ravages of climate change, the ravages now of the pandemic, and other aspects, extreme weather events like what just hit Texas. It's freezing cold. It shut down the energy grid. The fires in California, the floods in Bangladesh, the water scarcity in India, so forth, all around the world. Humanity is paying a price for our neglect of not only our natural systems, but our communities, because we've been treating each other like we've been treating the environment. And it's breaking down the interstices that bind us together, and it's breaking down our own immune systems that keep us healthy. So whatever your decision is on vaccinations, whatever your decisions on politics, the most important thing that we can really focus in on today is how do we build robust immune systems. That is key to our health. And to commence that program, I want to welcome and invite Eleanor LeCain. She used to be the Assistant Secretary of State in the state of Massachusetts, where she also directed strategic planning. She's been active in social affairs and environmental affairs for many, many years. She hosts a weekly radio show called All Together Now on the Progressive Radio Network. So Eleanor, I want to thank you for putting this whole program together with Harriet, and I turn now the program over to you.
Thanks so much, Jim. I appreciate that introduction, and I appreciate the great work you've done really through your lifetime. And of all the magnificent things you've done, I think this Humanity Rising is the most important. I mean, you're really bringing us all together to see how we can use this opportunity and challenge of the pandemic to create a more just and sustainable world in a very shrinking time frame. So it's really vital work, and I thank you so much for that. And I have a long association with a new partner organization of Humanity Rising, which is Foxhaven Organic Farm and Learning Center. So a shout out to Foxhaven. It's a magical place. If any of you want to do a seminar or take a retreat, it's just 1 hour from Washington, D.C. here in the U.S. So Jim is right. This seminar is about how we strengthen our immune system, how to keep healthy naturally. I mean, we know having vaccinations will boost our immune system. And there are many different ways of keeping our immune systems strong. So we want to look at what some of those ways are. And also, as Jim mentioned, this particular coronavirus seems to have been transmitted from animals to humans in part because of habitat destruction and wildlife trafficking. So if we want to, that's part of why our immune systems are not prepared to deal with the coronavirus, because we haven't been exposed to it before. So this panel may also touch some on living more in harmony with our natural systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this panel will work. 3 of our panelists will offer a presentation, and that'll be Dr. James Gordon, Dr. Elizabeth Satorus, and Mr. Michael Taylor. I will introduce each panelist before they present. And after each presentation, we'll have a chance for panelists to comment or raise questions about what we just heard. And I invite all of you listeners to add your comments and questions in the chat roll, and we'll try to weave as many of those in as we can. Our 4th panelist is Mr. James Turner. He will be our commentator in chief. And Jim is a partner at the Washington, D.C. law firm of Swanken and Turner and a leading consumer rights and natural health advocate. So let's turn now to our first presenter. Dr. James Gordon is the author of Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, a Harvard-educated psychiatrist, and the founder and executive director of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. Dr. Gordon is a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School, and under Presidents Clinton and Bush was the chairman of the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. Dr. Gordon, please begin.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you, Jim Garrison, both. What I'd like to do is to reflect a little bit on some of your remarks, Jim Garrison, and give us a sense, a kind of foundation for what's necessary not only to enhance our immunity, but to enhance our connection with our own nature, and perhaps also to open us to greater connection to other humans as well as to the natural world. What's been happening during the pandemic is in many ways an exacerbation of a chronic condition that afflicts us in the developed and increasingly in the developing world as well, which is a kind of chronic level of anxiety, agitation, irritability, that the level of stress that we experience, certainly here in the United States, is extremely high. And with that stress comes a depletion of our capacity to respond immunologically as well. So the way that I work, both as a physician in practice and as somebody who at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine has been creating programs of healing population-wide psychological trauma for the last 30 years, during and after wars, after climate-related disasters, during the opioid epidemic, after school shootings, with indigenous people here in the United States who've experienced poverty, violence, and suicide epidemics. What we have developed is a method for helping people come back into balance, or perhaps for the first time to find some kind of physical, psychological balance, some kind of greater ease in relating to the world around them. And it's kind of fortuitous and totally appropriate that Jim Garrison, that you began with a couple minutes of simply sitting quietly and attending to breath and heartbeat. When we're under stress, as we are chronically in the Western world, and as we have become increasingly so during the last year, there are two basic reactions. And I'm just reviewing what probably most of you already know. It's just a reminder that the two reactions are the fight or flight reaction and the freeze response. These are the two primary biological reactions to threats of any kind, whether it's the chronic threat of unemployment or violence or concern about climate-related disaster, or the more acute threat of the current pandemic. And these responses are these responses are there in our vertebrate ancestors, and they're meant to be very quickly turned on and just as quickly turned off. So if we're if we're an antelope escaping from a lion on the Serengeti plain, we go into fight or flight, and 3 minutes later, if the lion doesn't catch us, we're happily grazing. I'm speaking as an antelope now. I kind of identify with those antelopes, but you can see them in films. Fight or flight has come, done its job, and gone. We humans far too often either stay in a state of chronic fight or flight, which is what we're seeing all over the United States and all around the world during the pandemic, or remembering past insults, past trauma. Our minds keep us in that state of fight or flight. And in the state of fight or flight, there is stress hormones are put out and the immune system is suppressed. And immune suppression can continue, as well as the distortions in the immune system, which we look at, generally speaking, as autoimmune illness or hyperinflammatory conditions. This is a consequence of fight or flight. The other response that we have when the trauma, the stress is overwhelming and inescapable. Think of the antelope being caught by the lion. Think of someone, yourself or others, being the victims of an overwhelming physical assault or a rape. Think of a soldier in a Humvee that's blown up and buddy is dying next to him and he or she can't fight. It's just trapped there. Is the freeze response, which once again is a kind of is a deeper last ditch survival response. It can be very helpful. A lot of people I've worked with from around the world, for example, who've been tortured in other countries, they say they go into a complete shutdown, they don't feel the pain, and they often feel like they've left their bodies and are observing themselves from far away. It's a mechanism of self-protection. Fight or flight is grounded in the sympathetic nervous system, and the freeze response is grounded in the oldest part of the parasympathetic nervous system. As those responses continue, they have negative effects not only on immune system, but on all of our ways of relating to the world. If we're in a life or death situation, digestion doesn't work so well, we're constantly vigilant, we're worried all the time, we get easily irritable. If the trauma and stress is overwhelming, we become withdrawn, and it's hard to make connections with other people or with the world around us. So the ways of addressing, and what I'm doing is sort of condensing really 50 years of work And the whole of my book that Eleanor mentioned, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Wholeness and Healing, into a few minutes. So forgive me for the condensation and simplification, although I hope it's helpful. The first is we need to come into balance. We need to come into physiological and psychological balance. The piece of meditation, the experience of meditation that Jim Garrison did at the beginning is technically, it's a concentrated meditation. We're focusing on the breath, perhaps focusing on the heart rate. That is the antidote to fight or flight response. The antidote to freeze response are the best, simplest, are very active, expressive meditations, shaking and dancing, fast, deep breathing, laughing, shouting, jumping up and down. They break up the freeze response. They allow suppressed emotions to emerge. They allow our bodies to move more freely. These two, a combination of quiet meditation, whether it's a concentrated meditation or a mindfulness meditation, paying attention to thoughts, feelings, and sensations as they arise, and the expressive physical meditations. When those are used on a regular basis, they bring us into the physiological and psychological balance, which allows our immune system to function with maximal efficiency. It allows us to make use of all the other tools and techniques of self-awareness and self-care, all the other therapeutic and group approaches that are available to humanity. And the complete program is one I describe in Transforming Trauma. And it's a program that grows with each person's understanding, with each person's ability in a state of balance to mobilize their imagination, to discover the ways that are most appropriate to not only keep them in balance, but help them move forward with their lives. And also that state of physiological and psychological balance allows us to connect more easily with other people who are that community which so many of us have lost and which has been even more endangered during the pandemic. And finally, the balance that we achieve allows us to, the internal balance with our own nature allows and encourages us to find a rebalance and a reconnection with the natural world in which we live and which sustains us. So I think I probably should stop here and open things up for questioning.
That's great, Dr. Gordon. Thank you for condensing a lifetime of learning into 10 minutes. Well done. I'd like to invite our two other panelists, Jim Turner and Michael Taylor. If you have any questions or comments right now, come on up. And I just wanted to highlight what you said, Dr. Gordon, about that we're now living under chronic stress. I mean, we were even before the pandemic, but now people are literally worried about life and death constantly. So that's a very high stress situation for the entire society. So I really appreciate your suggestions on what we can do to bring our bodies back into physical and psychological balance.
I have a question for Dr. Gordon.
Yes, go ahead, Jim Turner.
In the introduction, you were identified as the chair of the former White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine. And as a lawyer and health consumer activist, I've taken that out and we've been dusting it off and looking for things to send over to the Biden folks. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on whether that's a wise idea and any guidance on how we might do that.
Oh, you know, it's so, thank you, Jim. And thank you so much. Also, you were a sort of important contributor to the work of that White House Commission as well. You know, I think that the recommendations that we made in there are still, if people want to go back and look at the report and look at the executive summary, they'll see the recommendations are still extremely relevant and they have not been attended to nearly as widely as we hoped. And a central recommendation was the importance, the critical importance of self-care and of group support. And it's that they needed to be brought into the center of all healthcare. And this is, you know, always been part of my focus, but was also part of the commission's focus, the 20 of us who heard testimony from 1,000 people, oral testimony and written testimony from many thousands. This is so clear. And as I think you know, this is the greatest challenge to the current healthcare system. It's easy to incorporate, or easier to incorporate, a little of this, little manipulation, little acupuncture, a few herbs here, a little dietary change. But the shift to giving people the understanding, the knowledge, the guidance that they need to take care of themselves has yet to happen. And unfortunately, as a result of the two organizations within the US government that picked up most enthusiastically on the White House Commission recommendations, and I recommend that people do dust it off and look at that executive summary, were the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration. And particularly the VA has been, I think, we're at the Center for Mind Body Medicine, we're doing a great deal of work with the VA to encourage veterans to realize their own capacity to help themselves. But unfortunately, it hasn't penetrated very deeply into the Department of Health and Human Services or into the funding that comes out of NIH. So we have a long way to go still.
One of the thoughts I had, Jim, I'd like you to comment on this, is that we talk a lot about enhancing immunity. It seems to me that one of the natural healing issues that we need to address is enhancing community. Does that make sense to you? Well, I know we've talked about things like that in the past, but I'd almost like to make a slogan out of that.
Absolutely. I mean, we know from the research that's been done for many, many years, research probably going back 40, 50 years at least, that community not only enhances immune functioning, it enhances longevity and enhances our ability to deal with every threat to our health. And loneliness is a major contributor to the kind of parallel pandemic, if you will, of chronic illness, which we're suffering. And indigenous people understood this. Indigenous people, all the groups that I know of, when somebody becomes significantly ill, the official healer brings together the extended family or indeed the whole community, because it's understood that the imbalance within an individual, and they do know that there are difficulties in the individual mind and body. Sometimes scientists say, no, they don't know that. No, they know very well. And they also know that community is an incredibly powerful force for healing. And that when you're dealing with very serious chronic or life-threatening conditions, you do need to reestablish those bonds with community. So absolutely, Jim. Yeah.
I have one final question at this point. To just comment on what you just said, I at one point was driving around Maryland and noticed that there were billboards that said, having friends is the first line of protection against getting cancer. And I thought that was a very interesting, and it was a big public campaign. The next point I was wondering is, as we begin to bring folks together in this kind of way, I noticed that the NIH office that addresses alternative medicine, as it was called in those days, has now refocused itself on what we call integrative medicine. And I was wondering, in your comments, you created two kinds of biological responses or physiological responses. There's a third response that we've been using in our health and political organizing, which we call embracing. It's embracing and transforming, or transiting out of, making an integration of the two forces that are colliding. Does that work in your thinking?
Well, this is where modern science and ancient wisdom are once again coming together. The Aboriginal understanding is that the kind of trauma that we're going through now can open the door to deep psychological and spiritual transformation. So that understanding is is I think really an important one, and that we can, if we are able to begin to bring ourselves in balance, the promise is not only that we'll be more resilient and have enhanced immune functioning, but that there can be a natural process of growth and development which makes us more compassionate toward other people, allows us to be more connected, and in fact makes us more concerned about the world around us. The first study, now the modern psychologists are calling this post-traumatic growth. And the first study was done on aviators who were shot down during the Vietnam War and were in the Hanoi Hilton, John McCain, of course, being the best known of those people. And they were tortured physically, they were separated, they couldn't see their families. It was a terrible, terrible time. But every one of those people, and they were interviewed by Air Force psychiatrists after they were freed, every one of those people said, they were all guys, they said, I'm a better person. And their family members agreed. He's less irritable, he's less angry, he's more concerned about other people. This is the possibility that is there for all of us. And in that state where this process of transformation goes on, we're much more open to other possibilities. We're more concerned with integration. We understand that we are a part of something larger than ourselves. So I think, and Jim Garrison, I think you were referring to this in your opening remarks, that out of this pandemic, there can come, if we really pay attention to the lessons, there can come a much greater understanding of our connection to and responsibility, not only to our own nature and our own selves, but to the natural world. And an understanding of the facts that you mentioned early on, that the pandemic itself comes from a disruption, just as HIV and AIDS did from a disruption between humans and the natural world. So I think part of our responsibility, and I know it's one which this series of Humanity Rising is responding to, is how do we rise to this occasion and make use of what we're learning and of this disruption, and how can we use this chaos that's come as a force for breaking up old patterns that haven't served us individually or collectively, and coming into a new, more flexible order, which Jim Turner, as you suggest, is one that is also more deeply rooted in community. So that's the hope, I think.
A very quick final comment. It's not a question. I was just going to say, we've been calling that embrace and transcend as a way of dealing with the situation, this and others. And also, we have, in our group, we have a basic group, Citizens for Health, and then Voice for Hope, Healers of Planet Earth. That set of people, we've been talking about the COVID-19 situation as, rather than a lockdown, we've been calling it a breakout. It's humanity breaking out of a set of constraints that have held it back. And if you look at the statistics, you'll see that the United States statistics are far worse than the statistics of much of the rest of the world on COVID-19. And if you look at that and compare it to the analyses of the health quality of the American citizens, we basically were 35th in the world generally, and we were last of all industrial countries on having the healthcare system or the health of the individuals. We were at the bottom, and we are at the top of the results of the COVID, what we call it a breakout. And it's humanity saying we want to move away from the kind of constraints. So that's my comment at this point, Eleanor, and let's go on to whatever other comments you're calling on or.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that, Jim. And Dr. Gordon, I want to thank you. You went right to the heart of the matter when you said the big shift we need in our healthcare system is better guidance for people on how they can keep themselves healthier, both the self-care and the group support. And I love that community is immunity. That's just so important. And that is actually one of the driving reasons why we pulled together this seminar today, to help share information with people on what we can do to strengthen our immune system naturally. And for that, I'd like to turn now to our next panelist is Dr. Elizabeth Satorus, who is actually in Hawaii now, which is quite a different time zone. So we have a pre-recorded interview I did with Dr. Satorus 2 days ago. Rick, can you roll the recording with Dr. Satorus, please? With Dr. Elizabeth Satorus, who is an evolution biologist, futurist, speaker, author, and professor at Chaminade University in Hawaii. She teaches there at the School of Business and Communication and an MBA program, and helps redesign it for entrepreneurship and local living economies. Welcome, Dr. Elizabeth Satorus.
Aloha.
Aloha. So when we spoke on my radio show recently, you said that viruses and bacteria are all around us and essential to the web of life, and that we shouldn't try to kill them even if we could, which we can't. So could you talk about the role of virus and bacteria, please?
Yes, I love the fact that we all are becoming more aware of the micro world in a happier way than we have been, because for so long we treated all microbes as if they were evil things out to attack us. And now we know that we're completely dependent on bacteria, for example, for our health, that there is no multicelled creature in all of nature that doesn't have a cooperative contingent of bacteria with it, riding in and on it, on our skins, in our guts, 10 times more bacteria than our nucleated cells, which are themselves cooperatives of ancient bacteria. So we now know that our immune system depends on the bacteria, that they repair our gut walls, they make vitamins, they do so many things for us that we realize now that only very few bacteria can be of harm to us if somehow we are out of balance with them. And so we're now learning the same thing about viruses. And it took us 30 years after we discovered antibiotics, which were designed to kill all bacteria, to realize that that was a bad idea. And now hospitals have some of the worst infections in the world because the antibiotics only selected for the hardiest and possibly most dangerous bacteria. And I think we're doing exactly the same thing now with viruses, that we're going to, I hope it doesn't take us 30 years to recognize that viruses are actually probably both the cleanup system and the communication system of our own cells. Most people don't even recognize or have never learned, haven't been told that all of our cells are spitting out viruses, exosomes, they're called, all kinds of viruses and particles and things 24/7 like dandruff into the rivers that flow between our cells. And as I said, part of that is getting rid of waste things that the cell no longer needs. And part of it is sending information, because all of DNA and RNA viruses are built into our DNA. We know that now. You know, they're a communication system.
Fascinating. So as a scientist, you know a lot about the microbiome, the bacteria, the viruses, the living world. What do you think now, given the challenges and the dangers of the COVID virus, what do you recommend that people do that we can keep healthy?
Well, as I said, our bacteria are here to help us strengthen our immune system, to run the immune system, things like that. So what we need to do is to feed them as well as possible to make sure that our gut bacteria are kept healthy. And this is, you know, in a natural birth, the mother is passing bacteria on to her baby as it slides through the birth canal. And many cesarean babies now actually get swabbed with the mom's vaginal bacteria, you know, to get them started to create their own healthy biome. So we know that the best way to strengthen an immune system is to eat really healthy food and live a generally healthy lifestyle, not expose yourself to too much dangerous radiation and other things that can harm you also in the environment. And so I'm a big crusader for, I don't care what kind of a diet feels best to you for your body, just make sure that all of it has been produced in healthy ways, both the plants and the animals.
Yeah. So organic food where you can. And also you were mentioning about vitamin D as something that with this particular virus be helpful for us to keep our vitamin D up there.
Yes, there seems to be a very strong correlation between low vitamin D levels and people who actually get the COVID illness, which takes much more than the virus to produce the illness. You can harbor this virus without ever getting it, as we know. We say many of the people who test positive never get sick.
Mm-hmm.
So that suggests that those are the ones who do have the higher vitamin D levels and generally the healthier immune systems.
And you speak and work globally, and what are you finding out about what some other countries might be doing and how they treat people who have or they think have the COVID virus and feeling the symptoms of it?
Well, this is to me the most exciting news, and it's coming out now in the Biden administration with the new COVID officer who is now talking publicly about medications for COVID disease. And that's very exciting to me because I've been doing this research, and I know, for example, that in El Salvador, the president has stocked 26 million COVID kits for self-medication. And they are relatively inexpensive, long tried, tested, a couple of medications, and then supplements such as zinc and vitamin D and vitamin C. And they're having extremely good results. Their formal study won't be over till March. But not only El Salvador is doing this, but Ecuador's government is also, is it Guatemala, I think's government is doing it as well. And a couple of other Latin American countries, and Mexico, the Biden's COVID officer, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name now. I only heard about him a couple of nights ago on the news. That he's saying that he's learning these things from Mexico. And I'm a bit embarrassed that the United States has to learn from Mexico and other Latin American countries. Africa is also giving out reports. And, truth to tell, the statistics on this disease are worse in our very advanced country than anywhere else in the world. And we've got to get through this. And we need to understand that there isn't only one way out of this. There's not only vaccines to help us through this process, that there are medications and preventives and healthy food and all those things that we can do for ourselves.
And we can take charge of ourselves to have as healthy an immune system as we can. I mean, you don't want it overstimulated and get out of balance that way, but, keep our bodies as healthy as possible. It's very good for keeping healthy. So looking now kind of with maybe this pandemic as a doorway into the bigger conversation, how do you think we could promote the sustainable health and well-being of humanity within the larger living systems of the earth and even the cosmos?
Well, this is, of course, my main work as an evolution biologist, is to track the trajectory of where we've come and where we can go from here, and to recognize a maturation cycle in which we move like others, species from time immemorial in evolution biology, have done, from a competitive, youthful, very highly creative competitive phase to a cooperative mature phase, just as we expect a teenager to be feisty and know it all and all that kind of thing, and then to settle down and become a cooperative citizen, right? We give them lots of sports to do, or we send them to war or whatever. It seems to be our only ritual for men to grow up, is to send them off to do battle and let off all that testosterone. So we can see it in ourselves that we expect those men to become cooperative citizens, and we see it in entire species in the history of evolution. So this is the time when we're moving from that hostile competition to friendly cooperation as a whole species in maturation. And we're seeing wonderful things through this COVID crisis, because the first thing that I thrilled to was people stopped seeing heroes as the warriors and the politicians, but the caregivers. And of course, a cooperative society is all about caring and sharing. So just the fact that our mentality went to seeing the heroism of caring and sharing was a very big deal for me. And of course, also watching that as soon as her humans were locked up, Earth started to recover amazing speed, with amazing speed, to get rid of the pollution in the air and blue skies and the animals coming out of hiding and, things going greener, all by nature is wonderfully regenerative in that way when we get out of the way. And then we were told, there's no money for a green economy. No way can you build, it's way too expensive. And we can't do that. And then suddenly, let's have a few trillion for bailouts. Excuse me, couldn't we spend those instead on a green economy?
Right, exactly. Well, we got some of that coming now with a new president in the United States, so hopefully we'll make more progress on that. Well, that's all the time we have. Dr. Elizabeth Satorus, thank you so much for being with us today.
Mahalo and aloha mai kako. Blessings to everyone.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. And I had a question for Dr. Gordon based on Dr. Satorus's comment. She referred to the vital role that bacteria and viruses play in keeping us healthy, particularly bacteria and viruses in our gut. And I'm just wondering if you had any thought about the role of these bacteria and viruses in keeping us healthy.
I do, and then I have another thought that was also suggested by what she had to say. And the first is, yes, we know from some studies that have been done in recent years that children who have more connections with the earth, literally with dirt, children who are playing more in the natural world have enhanced immunity. And we've lost that. So many kids are separated from that natural immunity that comes from taking in all those microorganisms and having them a regular part of our growth and development. And it's kind of like a dance. They're growing and developing as the children are, or as all of us used to be and no longer are. So I think that's one of the reasons that we are seeing so much more chronic illness in kids. One of the reasons, aside from the enormous stress that kids are under, is the diet they eat. But one of the reasons is the disconnection from those microorganisms. The other thought I had, and this is really important, and I think what Dr. Satorus said about caregivers as being heroic figures, yes, I think we have that appreciation. On the other hand, what is happening, and what we've seen at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine over these months, is how overwhelmed caregivers are, how often they have been unsupported by their institutions, how they're overworked, underappreciated, they didn't have protective equipment. They're feeling, and many more than usual, physicians and nurses are leaving. They're leaving the professions. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is another wake-up call, and this is a significant part of the work of the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, is to really create climates that support the caregivers, that give that speak not only to individual caregivers, but to institutions. And we're doing this with the largest division of the VA and with some other hospital systems. And they were saying, you've got to take better care of the people who are the caregivers, the doctors, the nurses, the attendants, people who sweep the floors in the hospitals, the pharmacists. All of them need more attention and more support, and they need to be able to come together with each other to support each other, as well as to learn the skills of self-care. And where we've seen that happen, where hospitals have implemented some of the programs or Center for Mind-Body Medicine programs, staff in the hospital has said, you know, I really feel cared for. This makes me so excited about being here in this institution. So I'm hoping that that can be a focus going forward, and that we don't lose sight of that after this pandemic subsides. And right now and in the future, that we support the caregivers.
I had a quick comment on something that I heard Dr. Satorus say as well. She mentioned that the issue of antibiotics in the hospitals, and pointed out that that was a kind of an epidemic of its own nature, and it is a very serious problem. And it is important to recognize that we do have some pandemics underway that we're very aware of, and yet haven't quite gotten the same attention. For example, the opioid epidemic, a very, very serious problem, and it is spreading in many of the same ways, using the same mechanisms and hitting the same populations that we see COVID-19 hitting. That's also, I noticed one of the commenters pointed out that the World Health Organization a few years ago called attention to an epidemic of low vitamin D support. These things are, the thing that we're seeing with COVID-19 is an expression of the cultural framework that we're in, along with whatever the actual particular agent is. And it shows up in other ways. Opioid pandemic, vitamin D, low vitamin D, the issue of overuse of antibiotics. These are all worldwide problems that are growing out of the communities, and they are undermining the health of people just as COVID-19 is. And COVID-19 has actually created an opportunity for us to see it's almost like an X-ray or a snapshot, to see the framework of the society that we're in a way that can give us some guidance as to how we take steps to move out, beginning with community as immunity.
Well said. And I noticed, you know, Dr. Satorus really stressed the importance of the quality of food we had and have it be non-toxic, and how important that is. One of our viewers here is talking about, Veronica is talking about also exercise, you know, can be very underestimated. And I haven't heard anywhere in the media much of this conversation of what we can do to keep ourselves healthy, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone mention the exercise. Dr. Gordon, how important is exercise to our immune system?
Exercise. Well, you've already said it, Eleanor. It's clear. It's very important, and there are a number of studies showing how exercise can enhance immunity. Early on, there was some discussion about cancer and about having a friend and connecting with people as helping to prevent cancer. The same can be said of exercise. It's very clear that exercise not only helps to prevent a number of cancers, is that it also helps to prevent recurrence. It's a vitally important part of immune functioning. One of the deep lessons of the last 60 years is how interconnected every function in our body is, every cell in our body is, and how responsive they are to living in harmony with our genetic programming. I just want to add this one little piece. When I look for sources of stress, one of the things that always impresses me is how far away we are from living in harmony with our genetic programming. And the things that we're talking about, whether it's the food we eat and our relationship with the bacteria in the natural world and the viruses in the natural world, those levels of stress, also the levels of exercise, all of those are are so much, there's so much less stress, so much more movement, so much healthier food, so much more community in the life of our ancestors. And that's the life that our DNA is built for. So I like to remind myself of, we're meant to move, not sitting, we're sitting in front of a screen for an hour and a half, and then we should be getting up and moving. And even as I'm sitting here, I'm moving. I can see Michael Taylor is moving around a little too. We're not supposed to sit rigidly. And the way we eat, and I've seen in a couple of the texts, eating a little bit slower, more mindfully, as well as what we eat. Indigenous people I've spent time with, they take time eating 45 minutes of breakfast, hang out. What were your dreams like? What's happening in the family? So I think we need to pay attention to who we are as a species and to our biological roots. And that will help to keep us on this path of healing. And in the process, will very much, will contribute significantly to enhancing our immune functioning as well.
I'd like to make one other quick comment on what Jim just said. We are also out of touch with our political genetics. I went in, we have a constitution and a Bill of Rights and so forth that have set out sort of some ideas about how we're supposed to integrate our politics or our policymaking with our natural world. The Declaration of Independence speaks of the natural God, for example. I was in a hearing in 1975. It was a 12-week hearing. It was 2 weeks at a time over about 6 months on nutrition labeling for food in 1975. We had all the country's best nutritionists, best scientists, best everybody. When I ended up at the end of that 12 weeks, there were two things that struck me as important that I think are valuable here. First of all, it added up very simply. I don't mean to be flippant about this, but it added up to very simply walk more and eat less. I mean, this was 12 weeks of intensive.
What produces health is actually really simple and obvious, but and I'll get into reasons why we tend to avoid not actually looking at these things in a moment. And but these are principles that we can all accept actually produce health and well established in the literature. So when I'm starting with my patients, I try to get them to look at all aspects of their health. How is their food? How is the water? Are they exercising? What is their sleep like? Do they have a clean environment? Do they have a clear understanding of their identity? They resolve their relationships with their self? Do they have resolved relations with their family? And at this point, I always put a caveat, not necessarily good relations, but resolved, and that you don't have to keep putting energy into it. Almost everyone makes a face when I say resolved relations with family. It's really interesting. Then understanding our role in the community or our work, and understanding our relationship to the world or our spiritual identity, however you want to frame that. And this is, if the last points I was mentioning, in terms of our identity, our relationships with our family, our understanding our role in the community, and understanding our relationship with the world have been extremely disrupted in this time of the coronavirus. And that's because we're existing in a world where it's very hard to discern what reality is. There's we exist with the belief that many of the people in our population have beliefs that don't make sense at all, and we're all left with the feeling, how could they possibly believe this? And so why do we go into these extreme states of belief? Like, why are people denying that the coronavirus even exists? And so when I'm looking at all those points I listed, it's my consideration that when they go out of balance, it's because of ignorance, denial, or poor boundaries. An illustration of that, poor boundaries in regard to food, eating all kinds of food that you know you should not eat, or ignorance, not knowing that those foods are bad for you, or denial that you're even doing this. And the denial is a really important aspect here, because I believe that a lot of folks in our culture, and I'm speaking of the global culture, have been forced into a sort of denial because we're facing so many existential threats at the same time. Not only is there the climate catastrophe, and the coronavirus, the extreme political polarity, so this forces people into a shutdown state. We're talking about the fight or flight responses. And this is a question I have for Dr. Gordon, if you would answer after I speak, is, if you could give tips on recognizing when people are in those fight or flight responses and knowing that you won't necessarily be able to communicate with that person in a rational way at that point. So the it was an interesting process for me in resolving my denial in regard to the coronavirus, because, and I say it now because it became clear to me after I went through this process that I was in a bit of a denial. This actually all started with, I was diagnosed with melanoma, a few months into the pandemic. And I watched myself go through the process I'd seen a lot of my patients go through, and reconciling of their life, coming to terms with all the things they wished they'd done, all the things they regretted they had done. And I started to go through that process myself, imagining I'm talking to my children, telling them that I might not be here for forever, things like this. And I found in allowing myself to reconcile my own fear of death, in regard to the melanoma, I was able to experience joy again. Because what I was experiencing was this deep sorrow, in a malaise, like the feeling like nothing I do is going to matter right now, and as I was going through this process, I started to realize I was holding these feelings towards the world itself, and when I started to think about the very real possibility of economic collapse, of environmental collapse, I started to realize that I had been in a denial of how much this was actually affecting me and producing this low-level anxiety all the time. And I spent a lot of nights crying, but when I moved through this, on the other side of it was joy. I realized in my suppression of that fear, I was also suppressing my ability to enjoy life. And this ability to enjoy life, I would say, is our greatest protection against the COVID-19. Because irregardless of what's going on, all the things that make life worth living are still present. There's still the enjoyment of music, there's still dancing, there's still playing with my children, still walking in the woods. And so I would ask that everyone focus on re-inhabiting their body, because what I'm seeing is everyone, or most people, I should say, they're very much in their heads in this analytical process trying to navigate. But when we're faced with so many different sources of information, that's not a really reliable tool for navigation. And we can, I experienced this walking down the street today. I was walking down the street, mailman came up. I was out walking, so no one around me. I wasn't wearing a mask. And I had this little thought of myself, what is this person going to think? Are they going to be okay with me? And, and I just went, no, I'm just out enjoying a walk. I pulled myself out of my head, and paying attention to how our bodies feel as we're encountering these stressors is a really good compass for navigating our ways towards health. And how we feel is, am I enjoying myself right now? Do I like what I'm doing? So when we're faced in a pandemonium of noise, we have to pull ourselves from it. And this is, because the reason the pandemic is happening is because of the degree of interconnectedness that we all exist. right? And this degree of interconnectedness has made it so that things are transmitting very fast without time for reflection. You know, there's a lot of speaking about the importance of community here, and this is what I've come to understand myself. Our biggest protection here is our community, but if that's only true if our community is actually providing our needs. If we're having to rely on things external to our community, we're having much more exposure, not just viruses, but I would say the virus of ideas. Because more, what strikes me as a bigger threat to humanity right now is the ability to ascertain truth. And we all are seeing the effects of this social media and the distortions that's causing in our culture. And so here, this is an example of poor boundaries, where we're letting too much in, more than we are actually able to process. And so to be healthy in this time, I don't want to go into a denial and pretend this doesn't exist, but be specific and make a choice on how much time you're spending looking at what's going on now with the coronavirus. And is that actually producing, the time you're spending, how do you feel after you do that? Like, pay attention to the effect that it's having on you. In terms of basic physical protection of the coronavirus, I do take some basic supplements, but I would say, the main things I'm doing and protection for myself are spending time in nature, going for walks. I go for walks 3 times a day, irregardless of what's going on. And excuse me, Mom. So I haven't really, what has become most important to me is to continue my life living in a way that produces enjoyment in a daily level. It's sort of re-inhabiting my body, reclaiming my place on this earth. And so I think in moving forward, not only do we have to look at how to be healthy as an individual, but we have to look at how our society needs to exist so that we're not continuously facing these challenges. And we have to bring ourselves to a point where we can all agree on a consensus reality. And I think the foundation of that is by being in touch with how we actually feel and not focusing so much on the abstract level of ideas.
Thank you, Michael. That's an important reminder. Often we live in our heads, important reminder to connect with our bodies here. And I would invite now Jim Turner or Dr. Gordon, any comment or question on Michael Taylor's presentation?
I did have a question. I thought it might be useful for the audience, and that is, Michael, could you tell us a little bit about NIA and what it does and how it works as an institution here in DC?
Yeah, National Integrated Health Associates was founded about 25 years ago, and we have a diverse group of providers, MDs, dentists, acupuncturists, massage therapists, psychologists. And when we're working with a patient, we're trying to look at every aspect of the health, and we're trying to take the best from Western medicine and integrate it with more alternative practices, holistic practices. And it's and right now we're currently working on instituting a program with health coaches, because there's every provider's awareness that the most significant aspects of the health are the things that the patient has full control over. What are they eating? Are they getting exercise? Are they sleeping? Do they enjoy their work? Things like this. And so we're trying to take it to another level right now. We're about to launch a program.
I have one policy comment about that, Eleanor. I've worked with NIA in the past and helped do some legal organization there and so on. one of the things I noticed in working with the DC regulators and even at the federal level is that the model of breaking down the healthcare profession into specifically identified and licensed subsets is beginning to fray. Patients need to go into, they come with a health issue and they go into that community of healthcare, and they're forced as their first choice to figure out which professional they go to. And there has been a lot of effort in the last 20 years to address that. There are people who are identified as a sort of like triage medical people who you talk to, and they figure out which the best place for you to go is. NIA, I believe, is an example of many groups across the country who are recognizing that when you can go into a place like that, they can help you pick what the best things are for you to do, as opposed to you having to sort of chart your future health-wise by the first phone call you make. And I think that's an important unfolding that's going on that we should actually help. And I think Corona is making it increasingly clear. There are lots of movements that are moving in that kind of direction. But I just wanted to get that on the record as a part of a way of thinking about where we're going as a society at the moment.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, James. It was my role to be the triage person for the cancer program at NIA. To try to, and the main thing I would, the first thing I would always do is ask the patient why they thought they were sick, and then I'd present options to them and see what they gravitate towards naturally. And, because my assumption that no one knows that person's health better than the patient themselves, right? And, no one's going to have success with a treatment that they do not feel philosophically aligned with. So it is very important to respect patients' autonomy in those decisions and not sort of force them down a path that they don't necessarily want to follow. So thank you for saying that.
I wanted to respond, Michael, to the question that you asked me, and also sort of circle back to what Jim Turner just said. I think the way that people recognize that they're in fight or flight or under stress is simply taking a little time to become aware of what's actually going on. And, are you having trouble sleeping? You're having trouble concentrating? One of the ways for me is if I find I'm more irritable with people, or if I'm sort of desperately eager to make sure my point is made, and I can feel that building. So I think it's really a matter of pausing and paying attention to what's going on with us. Looking at, when I was working with Center for Mind Body Medicine, we were working in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. And I had a session with a group of 10-year-old girls who'd lost their homes, and many of them had lost family members. And they were able, just giving a few hints, these girls were able to identify every symptom and sign of fight or flight with the exception of dilated pupils. And when I mentioned it to them, they said, oh yeah, of course, of course. So I think it's a matter of understanding that we have the capacity to do that, to recognize what's going on, and just providing that basic information, which should be part of the education of every child. Jim was referring to the White House Commission. We tried to get this kind of program into the schools after the White House Commission, and the Department of Education was resistant. Now things are beginning to change. At the Center for Mind Body Medicine, we're working with the 6th largest school system in the country, Broward County, Florida. We began because there were the shootings in 2018 in Parkland, and 17 people were killed. So we were called in to deal with the trauma. And once we got there, we were saying, yes, we want to help you deal with the trauma. And there's an ongoing need for kids to learn how to understand themselves, to learn how to take care of themselves, an ongoing need for kids to come together and talk with each other. Not only in that high school, but now we're working with, there are 270,000 kids in the county. And little by little, we're working with the whole system. The other piece, and this relates to Jim's question of you, is that one of the roles of every clinician, the most important thing is to be with the other person. When we were doing surveys back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, looking at why people went to see alternative practitioners, there are 2 reasons. One is they thought the tools and techniques could be more helpful to them. or augment what they were getting from conventional medicine. But the other, and even more important, was he listens to me. They take some time with me. So this what needs to come into, needs to be central to the education of all health professionals, that really our first job is to be there with other people. It doesn't make any difference if we're a surgeon or an anesthesiologist or nurse or whatever we are. That's what is so healing and makes all the difference. One of the worst things that physicians do, we talk about the benefits of a placebo response, of believing that a medication or a practitioner can help us. The opposite side is the nocebo response, the negative words. I don't know if you experience this as you were dealing with your melanoma, but the negative things that are said without thinking, and that don't make scientific sense, but that they're being imposed on people and they're terrifying. So I think that this has to be part of the change, and hopefully now that all of us being endangered, we will grow in sensitivity to the power of our words to hurt and the power of our words to help and heal, and of our relationship.
I have a comment on that, Eleanor, and a question for
Go ahead,
Jim.
Jim.
My comment is that from a standpoint of our groups working with people, we've made the argument and the metaphor of surfing. When you're surfing, what you try to do is control yourself and your body and how it relates to the forces around you. You don't try to control the wave. You try to be congruent with the wave. And then I want to expand that out slightly and mention that that seems to me to be important in creating legal and public policy. I was involved in all times, 1996, of moving acupuncture needles from being illegal to being legal, and we were successful. It took about 3 years of working with the FDA to take acupuncture needles, which were, acupuncture was at that point recognized in 41 states. It was being used by people all over the country, and yet the FDA had identified acupuncture needles as illegal. They were not enforcing that, but that was in fact the status. So we moved forward and changed that so that they recognized acupuncture needles as legal. Two of the issues that were involved in that, we presented scientific evidence, that acupuncture reduced pain. One of the interesting questions was, how do you discuss the placebo effect of reducing pain? If somebody says, gee, I had pain and now it went away, how does the scientist tell you, no, you just think it went away? That was a persuasive argument that FDA was able to grasp. Secondly, we talked about cancer and the ability to use acupuncture as a way of helping cancer drugs move effectively through the system. And acupuncture can be used for that. It can be used to reduce, for example, some of the side effects of chemotherapy agents. My point being, again, that integrating, we were able to persuade the FDA, and the FDA did in fact approve. They recognized acupuncture needles as legal. So I just wanted to get out there the notion of being congruent, not only scientifically and technically with your environment, but also there's a legal policy congruent that needs to be present as well. Finally, I have a question for Jim, and that is, Jim, would you be comfortable and could you help us understand what it is that causes this group of folks who believe there was no shooting at Parkland High School? What motivates that? What causes that to become part of our culture?
I'm laughing, not because the situation is funny, although in a way it does. I mean, it is so absurd. I think this is, and I'm trying to understand this. I spent a number of years looking at new religious movements, which people sometimes call cults, and watching how people gradually can give up the customary way of looking at the world, the customary thoughtfulness about other people, the customary weighing of different possibilities to grab onto something, a worldview that is absolutely fixed and certain, that they feel is, they not they alone, but they and a select group of people are privy to, that helps to reduce the pain and the stress and the trauma of living in the world and the consensual world we live in. So I'm only speculating. I've worked with, in both at Sandy Hook and in Parkland and in Santa Fe, Texas, after the shootings there. I think what it is, again, is it's people don't want to look at what's actually going on, and they would prefer an explanation which ties things up neatly. I think that's a part of it. And it becomes part of the larger tapestry. There was an article on the front page of the Washington Post this morning about the people who believe in QAnon and how detrimental it is to family members and family relations. It is a totalistic world view that people are embracing, and the denial of the reality of the shootings is often a part of that world. Just the way in my local pizza parlor, the Comet Ping Pong, those of you who are in Washington may know it, is famous or infamous now because QAnon said that's where the Democrats are holding children in the basement and drinking their blood and murdering them and having sexual relations with them. Well, this is totally, absurd, not the least because Comet Ping Pong has no basement. But people choose to believe in it, and I don't completely understand the psychology, but I have seen it. We see it in extremism of many kinds. It puts the world into a kind of neat package, and it resolves a lot of anxiety. There's a sense of belonging, and there's often a sense of denial of facts that are threatening. And perhaps, and this is just speculation because I haven't talked with those people, I've talked with a lot of extremists, but not with the ones who believe the school shootings were unreal. It is difficult to imagine the school shootings, the vulnerability of our children. Even in Parkland and Sandy Hook are both upper middle class communities, basically. And those children and the teachers there, were murdered. And I think it's hard for us, instead of looking directly and coming up with, more thoughtful solutions that deal with the entire context of what's happening, many people gravitate toward a simple solution. And I think it's not unlike, if you forgive me, not unlike the people who think if you only arm teachers, that'll be the end of it. Well, that's ridiculous also. And the teachers know that, or the vast majority of teachers know that. So this is a big subject. We probably should have a whole other session on this.
Right, good idea. Important topic, and but that does kind of bring to a conclusion this seminar, and just a very brief recap on some incredible highlights on how do we keep ourselves healthy naturally? How do we strengthen our immune system? We know chronic stress depresses our immune system, so let's try to reduce our stress. Let's meditate, let's walk in nature, let's come into physical and psychological balance. Let's exercise self-care as well as group support. I love that community is immunity, that supporting each other helps us be stronger and healthier. And we talked a bit about post-traumatic growth as the opportunity that this traumatic time can give us in actually growing. We talked about the role of bacteria and viruses helping to strengthen our immune system, and the way we can help with that is eating healthy to keep our gut bacteria healthy. We learned about medicine for COVID, treatments being given in El Salvador and Guatemala. We talked about the importance of caring for the caregivers, the importance of exercise, moving, skiing, dancing, walk more and eat less. So, and I love all of this information we want to make more available to people around the world, and particularly to the healthcare professionals. So I love that recommendation, focus on the education of the health professionals. So with that, I give thanks to our panelists, to our listeners, our commentators on chat, and I turn it back to our leader, Jim Garrison.
Eleanor, thank you, and panel, thank you for a splendid discussion. in the midst of all the confusion, it's really about embodiment. It's really about realizing that we're corporeal beings. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to be in the natural environment. It's all basically common sense. Although I was struck by the reminder, Jim, of that at one point acupuncture needles were illegal. And I think this is one of the contextual frameworks that I think I would encourage us in closing just to bear in mind that we're in a scientific sort of medical industrial complex that has been systematically eroding our confidence and our connection with our bodies, in part by emphasizing big pharma and high-tech medicine as the solution. And I think Malini made a very compelling point in the chat where she said, we're in a world right now where medical science is considered mainstream and naturopathic embodied science, indigenous wisdom is considered alternative, when actually it's the other way around. Acupuncture, for example, has been with us for thousands of years and has been effective in healing for that length of time. And now what has been the inherited wisdom is increasingly being marginalized with an intent to make it illegal. And I think that inversion of common sense plays into the fear that many people have about vaccinations. It's not that vaccinations in and of themselves are wrong, but the context of an over-reliance on science as it's understood in a scientific reductionist model is the only way to view the cure for the pandemic. And if we had, as was suggested here, a whole sort of an encyclopedia of all the things that you could do to improve your immune system, including having a vaccine, but with an emphasis on how through natural means we can strengthen our immune system, bearing in mind what Elizabeth Satorus reminded us, that the viruses are part of who we are. We couldn't function without the viruses that are inside our body. So what I'm appreciative of, Eleanor, Michael, and the Jims for today is that you've broadened our sense of context for what it is that we need to do as we move forward. And then I would conclude by just saying I love what Town Balling put in the chat, that community is immunity. I think what Jim said at the very beginning around loneliness as one of the central scourges of the pandemic. I mean, we've been in isolation, we've been in lockdown, we've been told we need to not touch anybody. And the psycho-emotional effects of that for over a year now, that's been the mantra coming out of the media and our governments. And the effect of that has been horrendous. And one of the reasons why we established Humanity Rising was simply in the midst of pandemic to allow people day by day by day to experience the intimacy of community. And I think it's the community holding all these natural immune boosters that is really the key as we seek to continue to navigate through a pandemic that has stopped our world, essentially because we stopped paying attention to the world. And now we're being compelled to open our eyes with deeper and fresh vision. So Eleanor, Michael, Jim, and Jim, thank you so much for this session today. I'm inspired and deeply grateful. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to be continuing our discussion about health, convened by the Nordic Health Alliance and the European Futures European Health Futures Institute, that will be convening the fourth of their series on health and looking at public health policy within the context of the larger environment. So that's tomorrow on Humanity Rising. We now want to invite all of you who can to join our after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. Panel, thank you. This has been inspirational. And Eleanor, let's do this again.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to take up this suggestion of what goes into the denial of Sandy Hooks.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not an incidental issue, everyone.
Mhm.
Denial has seized the Republican Party in the United States, for example. This is not just a bunch of kooks. Denial is now mainstream, and it's being exacerbated by social media. And you see the rise of parallel universes in Europe and in Asia. So I would really welcome an opportunity to delve into this issue of what goes into the psyche to such an extent that you deny facts that are obvious in their reality. So that's something I would love to think about and explore more deeply, Eleanor, if that's of interest to you, because that's how Humanity Rising grows. We're
Yes,
always looking
do
for
it.
fresh ideas and to go into some of these deep issues that that all of us wonder about and we don't see answered in the mainstream media with the depth that they deserve. So thank you all, and we'll see you again tomorrow on Humanity Rising, same time, same station, 5:00 p.m. Central European Time. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.